Week 5. That means we're basically halfway through the season, James, and it is in the
Yeah.
books. And now it's time to talk about some interesting games throughout the weekend. We didn't have
hmm
necessarily tremendously marquee games across the different regions because we had a lot of teams that did take the week off, and you'll see that in week 4
Yeah.
quite often, or week 5, excuse me, after 4 games
hmm
played. So I'm not surprised by that, but the action we did have was pretty good.
Yeah, and it's interesting this year with some of the movement around the conferences, like the former NEFC, now the CCC, the Liberty League, and the Empire, each having smaller league rosters. You can say that they play more out of conference games, and so now week 5, as we begin to turn the corner to the halfway point of the season. Most teams are finished with that out of conference slate. They've maybe played one or maybe two in conference games, and there have been some results that sort of, at least from my perspective, and would like to get your thoughts on this too, Frank, kind of surprised me as far as how things are starting to set up in each of the respective leagues. I know we talked a lot about the Hobart Ithaca game, and we'll get to that and the implications that has on the Liberty League. Now, with Ithaca having gone 2-0 in the Liberty League after starting 0-2, there was also an interesting result, if you ask me, in Western New England, coming back on multiple times to beat St. Lawrence in overtime, really putting the Saints in a rough spot. So Anthony Service and company, I know they got tripped up by RPI, but they've rebounded well and beating now Husson and St. Lawrence in consecutive weeks. So they have seemed to gotten back on track.
As you're doing that, I'm realizing I haven't really taken a grand look at the standings, and I'm calling them up on my iPad right now in the background here. So as we look at the scores, we can look at the standings as well, because you bring up a good point.
Okay.
Is some conferences have not played many or any conference games, but it's good to look at the win-loss records of the overall numbers right now to get an
Yeah.
indication of who's who and what's what. And it is interesting, look, in the grand view of what's going on in the East for me. And I was talking to Pat Coleman about this on D3Football.com because we're kind of looking at different situations with the top 25. People had Hopkins too high. We all thought that. In fact, the 5 core members that vote that are in D3Football.com's management or contributors, we all either didn't have them on our ballot or had them at best number 20. And Hopkins was way up there, like number 12-ish, I think it was. So it tells you that you got differing views throughout the country on how some of these teams are. But, for me personally, I've got Delaware Valley way up there. I've got them at like number 5, I think it is, without looking. Because here's the problem I'm running into. I have to somehow order Wesley, Frostburg, and Delaware Valley in no particular order from that, actually. I should have said Del Val, Frostburg, Wesley if I want to go in the order. And then Brockport as well. And then a team like Alfred as well now. And it becomes a little bit of a conundrum because there's 5 teams that I think are near each other in some form, but I also can slot in other teams in between them. And so what happens here is you get a real mix of, heights that I don't feel comfortable with. I've got Frostburg at number 8 right now. And I look at that and I say, I don't believe that personally, but I don't have teams below them I believe enough in to put them above them. So it becomes very confusing, but this is why you're seeing when teams lose, be it in the East or anywhere else, when a team loses right now, they drop right out of the poll sometimes, like Hopkins did.
Yeah.
Because there's just such a thin layer in between teams, let's say number 5 through 25. Normally we say that's in the 15 to 25 range, but it goes all the way up. And we can't grasp who's who and what's what right now. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up as you brought up just kind of the surveying the land. It's not just the East. It's the entire country having this problem right now.
Yeah, and a perfect example of that, and they're not a top 25 team just yet, but in the new MAC, I mean, MIT all of a sudden sitting at 4-1, they totally blew out U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, who was my preseason pick to potentially win that league, and now here's Coach Chad and the Engineers doing pretty well. I'm kind of surprised. I don't believe it's like, how did they lose to Curry? They probably should be 5-0, and then maybe they would be in a receiving votes kind of situation. But there are some teams that are really starting to kind of come out of the woodwork and be surprising. I mean, Brockport continuing to win isn't a big surprise. I think Alfred's win over Buff State was a little bit of a surprise, given that they struggled in week 1 and 2 against what some would term as, quote unquote, inferior opponents. However, Ithaca's beating Hobart, and the way that they're playing now is showing that maybe they were a little underrated. So it's really interesting to see how things are starting to set up, because there are some teams on the rise that are definitely not ones that I thought would be in this position, almost halfway through the season.
James, let's devote about a minute to each conference in our conference sweep that we do every week. And that means we focus a little bit on one game, but give you kind of the overall analysis. You'll see the scores on the screen as usual, folks. And that's how we do it here. And then starting probably next week, we'll also run win-loss records alongside those, so that you get an indication as we talk about them where they are. Right now we won't. We'll just bring up anything that we see in the win-loss records that's interesting to us. MIT beating Merchant Marine was impressive. What was it? Bryce Moore throwing, was it 5 interceptions ultimately in that game? 4 or 5, was it?
Yeah.
It was a day. But obviously when you're down and you're in the triple option, you're forced to throw the ball beyond what you're comfortable doing. That it would explain that problem. It starts just going completely downhill once it goes downhill, when you have to play catch up in the triple option. Springfield is being a tremendous team. They too are on my ballot. Actually, I didn't bring them up. I have them ahead of Alfred, actually, at number, I think, 21. I think they landed, or thereabouts, this week for me, against a Norwich team that's But Catholic beating Coast Guard, that was an interesting score to me too, because a lot of people didn't believe in Catholic after that Utica win. They thought it was a fluke. That score there tells me it's more than a fluke. They're not superstars, but at the same time, they are not a basement team right now anymore.
No, and I think in the preseason, I thought with a brand new head coach and mostly still new personnel, that they would probably match their record in the ODAC from the year prior. So I kind of penciled them in as like a 3-7, 4-6 team, and they are definitely much better than that. And so my apologies to Coach Gutierrez, who we had on the show, and he was a great guest. But once again, another team that we underestimated, or at least this guy underestimated, and they are really playing some good football down there in DC. Yeah, exactly.
That guy. Hold on. There it is. That guy. Didn't use his camera. It's a little bit bad.
Yeah, that's why we're just sort of amateur. We're not really pros here, Frank. We're just kind of winging it.
MassCAC action. I'm shocked that Western Connecticut loses to Mass Dartmouth after that Salve Regina comeback game, 17-13. And so that really hurts them in their attempt to try to make a name for themselves against a Framingham State type of team. You look at the rest, Framingham State had the week off, but Bridgewater State 28-9, bouncing back a little bit. Plymouth State 16-6 over Worcester State. Fitchburg State has a couple of wins in a row as well. So this is an interesting conference. Maybe it's not done yet, but Framingham State seems to have a step above the rest right now.
Yeah, at this point, I mean, we talked about this as one of our, we went through, one game for each conference in our lightning round. I like the Plymouth State Panthers. They're now 4-1. They took on Worcester State, more of a defensive game than I thought. But it seems to me that this conference is going to come down to the Rams and the Panthers when they play each other. And the way Framingham's been playing, they keep winning out. They could be a potential first-round host depending on how things shake out, because it looks like there's going to be a few teams in the East that aren't going to have that at the end of their record, at least for now. We'll see how that pans out.
You brought up Western New England beating St. Lawrence. This was confusing to us because I saw the score when it was actually backward and looked like it was final. It looked like St. Lawrence had won by a field goal in overtime. A missed input in overtime, unfortunately, was what created that. They corrected the box score later, and an 11-yard touchdown pass, which originally was Sean Richardson, and that's what you could tell as things were getting a little messed up there in the live.
Yeah, it's Anthony Service.
It was Anthony Service and not Sean Richardson, I can tell you that much.
Yeah.
But it was basically an overtime touchdown after St. Lawrence scored a field goal to win by Western New England. Chris Engel had hit me up, our good friend at St. Lawrence's radio station, WSNN, and he hit me up before the game. He's like, they just added Wi-Fi, which is an improvement over when I went there many years ago for the first time with Union. But he was like,
2017, all right.
Yeah, this is a tough atmosphere to broadcast in.
Yeah.
I was thinking to myself, and I said to him, I'm like, "Welcome to what I went through," and
And you said
this is exactly what I went through the first time Union faced Western New England, because we went there, we had a tough time broadcasting, and we went to overtime, and we lost in overtime as well. So, Chris, deja vu.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it was interesting because I had initially thought that the Saints had won, but you officiate in flag football, so you know these rules probably better than most. In college football, the overtime isn't sudden death. Each team gets a chance, and so if Team A kicks a field goal on their first possession, Team B can win the game with a touchdown, and that's exactly what happened here. So, even though it looked like it went final after the field goal, I guess probably most of us assumed, okay, well the defense stopped them, so the game was over. But in reality, the Bears had one more chance, and they cashed in on it.
And Rochester got their first win against Becker, so Becker's still having a tough time this season.
Second win.
Excuse me, second win. Yes,
yeah,
good point. But,
shout out to Emmanuel Carmar from Rochester. He had like 230 something rushing yards, couple touchdowns. So yeah, the U of R is 2-2. It's a nice start for them after prior seasons. They 2 wins would have been a nice thing for them. They've struggled a little bit in the last year or so, but hey, they seem like they've got a good new quarterback, and I think it's Matt Gallagher, I believe his name is. And there's some interest. There's a buzz going on in Rochester, Frank.
Wow.
That was lame.
That may be worse than me forgetting Alfred State in that win that they had against them.
Yeah, that was very Versace.
Oh, Versace. ECFC action. Speaking of Alfred State, got absolutely massacred by Maritime, 49-6.
The SUNY Maritime squad. It seems like
they want Bama.
They want Bama. Careful what you wish for. But at this point, it seems like it's all leading towards the battle between them and Husson for that ECFC Pool A bid in the championship. And this year, it could go either way. I mean, I think the Privateers look like a pretty complete football team, although maybe now their win over Merchant Marine doesn't look so impressive after what happened against MIT. But
I wouldn't say that. That's a tough game. You just throw out no matter what.
Turnovers, you kind of throw that one out the window. But Husson's John Smith, their senior running back. We'll have to see how a kid from Georgia ends up in Bangor, Maine, Frank. But he rushed for 301 yards. It's a crazy
by airplane. Trust me on that.
Man, so I believe we'll be talking to him in a little bit, and that's going to be an interesting story there, because that's a pretty incredible performance, especially for any running back, regardless of what level.
It's funny. I referee a co-ed flag football league here, and there's this one player in particular that's new. And a couple weeks ago, I saw him, and I'm like, "Boy, you play college football?" It's like, "Yeah, I did. I was quarterback at Husson at one time." I'm like, "Oh, yeah. Husson. I know Husson."
The Golden Eagles. All right.
They all want to continue playing football in some way, shape, or form. You gotta love it. The whole YD3 situation. So let's move over to the Liberty League, and Union at 4-1 now. Morrisville State misses an extra point, and that would have made it 28-28. Tough thing, but hey, Union moves to 4-1, and Morrisville State is having one of those seasons where you just can't tell who they are at any given point.
Yep.
But they kept bouncing back and responding against Union. Give me your balance here. We talked about Union slightly last week about is the schedule real or not, and the record that goes with it. They're 0-0 in the Liberty League. They'll face St. Lawrence, I believe, coming up next, if I remember correctly. So give me your 20-second spiel on Union, because right now they're 4-1.
Well, I think they're beating the teams that they probably could or should beat. And they're still a young squad, but they seem to be pulling the pieces together. The Liberty League slate will be interesting for them in the sense that I don't think they're necessarily the underdogs anymore with some of the drop-offs that we're seeing at St. Lawrence, maybe even at Hobart. So this Dutchman team could be in line for a 7-8 win season, depending on how things go. But yeah, they keep finding ways to win games. Their quarterback Cassione has been maybe not great, but he hasn't made any big mistakes. So Union's defense is hanging in there. Bend, don't break. It seems like it's working out.
And we're not going to ignore Ithaca beating Hobart, which is a game that we were both focused on. It took a last-minute touchdown situation for Ithaca to win. Hobart had a chance, passed up a 50-ish yard field goal opportunity that could have tied it, and that's not an easy field goal. So I don't blame them for that. Don't get me wrong. I'm just bringing up what the end result was.
And they didn't do themselves any favors. And unfortunately, even though freshman running back Dakota Harvey had a great game against Ithaca, he rushed for a couple touchdowns. He made the proverbial rookie mistake when he should have let the ensuing kickoff after the Ithaca touchdown roll out of bounds. He made the mistake of catching the ball and then realizing, oh, you know what, I'm on the sideline, and the Statesman had to go 95 yards in about 40 seconds. It was just too long. If you'll have to remind me of the rules, but if the ball did roll out of bounds, they would have gotten it at the 40-yard line, or if
worst case 25 if it went into the end zone out of bounds.
Yeah, exactly. So that was, that's one of those things. He's a freshman. He's probably one of the best athletes on the team. So he's the kind of guy you want to, running with the ball. He's not going to fumble it, or no one's going to knock it out of him. He's 6'1", 225. But you got to be a little more aware. And that was a critical mistake, and one when the Statesman really needed help. But at the end of the day, you got to give credit to Coach Swanstrom, who we had on the show last week. His athletes are performing, and he's calling great games. The Statesman defense you have a freshman quarterback throw for 343 yards on you. I mean, that's, secondary's got to get better. The defensive line didn't do much better. The Tristan Brown is a good running back, but 5'7", like 150, 160. He's not exactly a bowling ball, and he ran for 120 yards. It's just too much yardage, and the Statesman hung in there, but it was a little too late.
Two things, though, I will say. We talked. It's kind of funny. We brought up the riverboat gambler mentality of Craig, and sort of attributing Swanstrom a little bit of that before the game. He eschewed an attempt at a field goal with about 3 minutes left and all timeouts still in his back pocket when he was deep on Hobart. That would have made a 1-point game and made a field goal possibility to win if they got the ball back. He said, no, we're going touchdown or nothing. And at the time, it looked like a questionable decision, but it paid off in the end. I will also tell you that when the kickoff after the touchdown occurred, I'm eating lunch, late lunch, with my co-ref, Anthony Ortiz is his name. We're watching the game on my phone while we're eating because Saturdays can run a little thin for me, and we let out an audible ooh in the Chinese restaurant we were eating at when that happened, because like we were like, oh, you can't do that. You cannot touch the ball where that was. So you feel bad for the player that did it, but at the same time, the coaches are saying to him, we tell you never touch that ball if it's within 2 yards of the end line or the sideline. Yeah. Don't try to be a hero in that situation.
Yeah, and I don't want to run too long, which is what us bankers and lawyers tend to do, but you'll have to remind me, because it's been a few years, probably back until 2010 or 2008, when the Liberty League could be in a potential multiple tie situation. I mean, Ithaca is in leading the pack with 2-0. They have 3 more league games, so in theory they would have to lose 2 of those 3 potentially for someone to catch them. RPI and Ithaca haven't played yet, so that's St. Lawrence, the same thing, Union. So there's that. But if you're a Hobart fan, I mean, what are the chances of them ending up 4-1 and somehow by some miracle winning the league?
It's tough because the tiebreaker that will become the relevant tiebreaker is win-loss record against teams that are 500 or better on your schedule, which means the out-of-conference teams that were 500 or better. And if you look at it, Ithaca had the loss to Alfred and has had an interesting overall win-loss record. Hobart, I think, actually does slightly better, assuming their schedule holds up in terms of the teams that they faced. So you almost have to start rooting for the teams that you've beaten to be 500 or better later on. You need a 3-way tie to form in which Hobart beats one of the teams and one of those teams beats Ithaca, and so you have a merry-go-round three-way tie at 4-1, and then it goes to that other tiebreaker I just brought up to you. So we'll keep our eye on it, but it's not impossible if Ithaca loses a game. But Hobart has to basically, they control their own fate still. They have to run the table now. Otherwise, all bets are off for Hobart. Empire 8. We talked a little bit about some stuff there, but Brockport struggled against Cortland but pulled it out late. And Joe Germinario had a great game ultimately with his numbers. He really did save the day for his team. 6 touchdowns there. Not the most for a player this weekend. Hardin Simmons had a player who had 8 touchdowns, 7 on the ground, which ties an NCAA record for Division III. Utica beat Hartwick, and Alfred beating Buffalo State. I thought Buffalo State would put up more of a fight. Alfred's defense clamped down on them, and we'll have Coach Rankel on the show if you haven't already seen that interview. Look for it on the Facebook page. We will not belabor discussion on that because we will have a lot more coverage on Alfred in that respect. In the NJAC, things getting a little interesting there. I didn't think that CNU would perform as well as they would against ultimately Rowan. If you told me it would be a 30-0 game, I would have actually suggested it may have been the flip, that Rowan would have won with that kind of score. 30-0 in favor of Christopher Newport, and Montclair State beating Kane, and Wesley just blanking Southern Virginia. But the highlight game out of those 3, CNU over Rowan.
Yeah, and I thought after the prior week that Rowan's defense was simply just better than that. I guess the captains just kind of got things rolling. I knew that Rowan's offense had struggled in bits and starts here and there, but for the most part, I thought this would be a much more competitive game. Looked like maybe CNU and Wesley will be the teams that are kind of on the collision course, as I like to say, for that conference championship. Although you can't discount the fact that Frostburg's in there too, and talk about a 3-headed monster. There's a lot of good football to be played down there in Jersey.
And I'll tell you one thing I was just trying to call up here. I wanted to look at the box score because I was following the Albright Kings game for a little while on Saturday, and it really took Albright to come from behind. I mean, they were down 31-21 with 50 seconds left in the third quarter, and it took a 3-yard Magnolia run for a touchdown, a 32-yard Getz field goal, and then another 32-yard Getz field goal with 58 seconds left to win 34-31. They stay even with Del Val at that 4-0 or 5-0 mark at this point, actually, I believe. Just verifying here. It's 5-0 for both of them. They've yet to have their bye. So those two teams are in a collision course. And, of course, James, we don't want to forget about the NESCAC and the highlight game there. Trinity Williams, Trinity 17, Williams 9. Williams had chances to take the lead in this game because they were within 5 points with 12:39 left in the third quarter. But Trinity's defense clamped down. The first 9 points given up this season by the defense, but they were able to hold off Williams in a really thrilling game. You can see the rest of the scores right there for the NESCAC, but some interesting action that went on. Looking at briefly to Week 6, we'll have Lightning predictions later in the week. However, I'm going to be reffing at Gable 17 in Boston, so I will be kind of in the center, actually northeast of Worcester is where the fields are, but right near Fitchburg State. And so I'll maybe sniff and see what the climate of New England football is. Our friend Matt Noonan, unfortunately, has got a wedding, so he can't be joining me out there. But nonetheless, give me a preview what you're thinking about what we'll be focusing on, and then we'll actually predict them later in the week for Week 6.
So as far as Week 6 goes, I think in the top 25, you're going to have some interesting games. Not necessarily ones that would be on the East Coast radar. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I was wrong, Frank. Not that never happens every week, but that Del Val Albright game we were so pumping up. Well, guess what? It's on October 7th at 1:00. So we will find out if the Lions are as good as we think they are, and if Del Val is as good as we think they are, and that'll be an interesting tilt. And another top 25 battle is, hey, look at this. Number 23 Wesley versus number 11 Frostburg State, also a 1:00 kickoff. Two really big games for the East region right there. Alfred is taking on St. John Fisher, which Fisher is struggling a little bit, but they're always a threat. And then elsewhere, RPI Hobart is interesting in the sense that we talked about how Hobart has to run the table. RPI had their bye this past week. They have not played a Liberty League game, so they're 0-0, basically, kind of tied with Ithaca in that they have no losses, but they haven't had any wins yet. They have beaten the Statesmen twice the last 2 seasons, kind of played spoiler to Hobart. And so if the Statesmen have any hope to get back into the Liberty League race, they have to beat a pretty strong 3-1 RPI team. Other games that look interesting, I'd say maybe Plymouth State, Bridgewater State.
Look at the entirety of the nation, though. If I'm reading correctly here, Mary Hardin, Baylor, Hardin Simmons, that's number 1 versus number 6. Mount Union, Heidelberg is number 2, number 24, at least using the previous week's rankings. You've got Concordia, Moorhead, St. Thomas, that's 21 versus 7. Wesley, Frostburg. I mean, you've got some big-time games across the schedule coming up this weekend, and the East is only part of that equation, but we're going to begin to see who are the real deal teams and who are the pretenders right now halfway through the season, which is what it should be. Honestly, I hate seeing these big-time games in week 1 because it doesn't help anybody. I don't think having them there.
We kind of say week this is like a separation week 6.
Yep.
You'll start to see things sort of pull apart and conference races become more solidified. But having 2 top 25 games for the East region at this point in the season should be really exciting. We'll obviously keep a very close eye on those among the other games we just rattled off.
So stay tuned. We will have lightning predictions for a game in each conference coming up later in the week, and we'll also have a player interview if you haven't seen it already, and Coach Rankel's interview from Alfred coming up. So tune in here on In the Huddle's Facebook page. You know where to find us, and keep those shares going. We appreciate all the exposure you're giving us this season, folks. Until later, thanks for joining us.
Thanks.